Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at common denominators. So we've already spent time talking about the basics of fractions, then we looked at some equivalent fractions. Today we're going to focus on how do you find a common denominator for fractions that have different denominators. So just a quick definition. When fractions have the same denominator, we say they have common denominators. So the number on the bottom has to be the same for both fractions. So to find a common denominator, there's a couple steps we need to complete. So the first thing you need to do is, when you're given two fractions with different denominators, you want to list and find the multiples of each denominator. Then, once you have the common multiple, you rewrite each fraction with common denominators. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say I gave you 7/8 and 3/10. Remember, the denominators are the numbers in the bottom, so these are not common because they're two different numbers. So my first step is I take my denominators and I list the multiples. Remember, the multiples are the numbers you use or you get when you multiply the number by another number. So the easiest way is just to list them in order like you're counting. So 8 times 1 is 8, then times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24, 8 times 4 is 32, 40. So really we're counting by 8s. We're adding 8 every time. Those are the multiples for 8. Then we do the same thing with 10s. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So just counting by 10s. And now what I'm looking for is there a number that they have in common, like a common multiple? So a common multiple here that shows up is 40. I also see 80 pop up. So there's actually a couple multiples that we could choose. Generally, you choose the least or smallest multiple they have in common, so I'm going to choose the 40. So to turn 7/8, I want the denominator to have 40, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the 3/10. I want the denominator to have 40. Then it's going to give me two fractions with common denominators. So remember, we're just creating equivalent fractions. So we spent time talking about how to do equivalent fractions. You figure out what you multiply the bottom by, and then you do the same thing on the top. So to turn 8 into 40, I have to 2 times 5. And then on the top, it's the same thing. To turn 10 into 40, I have to do times 4. And on the top, 3 times 4 is 12. So to find common denominators for 2 or more fractions, you list the multiples of the denominators and then figure out what they have in common and rewrite those fractions. You might be asking yourself, why do we do this? What's the point? So when you have common denominators, a lot of things you can do. With common denominators, you can add, subtract, and compare fractions. So I could take 35 over 40 and subtract 12 over 40 because they have the same denominator. I could also add those numbers together. I could also compare and figure out that 35 40ths is bigger than 12 40ths. So that means that 7/8 has to be bigger than 3/10. So the reason you want common denominators, it helps you do a couple other steps or problems involving fractions.